Ever wonder what happens when car designers completely lose their minds? When someone walks into a boardroom and says, "What if we put a Formula One engine in a minivan?" And instead of getting fired, they get a budget. Well, the 1990s were exactly that kind of decade. This was when automakers had more money than sense, and designers were apparently doing some very interesting things during their lunch breaks. Today we're counting down the 10 most unusual concept cars from the 90s, machines so bizarre, so utterly insane, that they make today's concepts look like accounting department suggestions. Before we dive into this automotive fever dream, hit that like button and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. Number 10. Ford O21. See, in 1999, Ford decided to hand over car design to Mark Newson, the guy who designs furniture and private jets, and apparently had very strong opinions about what cars should look like. The result was the O21C, and it looked exactly like what you'd expect from someone who thinks cars should be more like IKEA showrooms. This thing was basically a rolling cube. No curves, no character lines, just cube. The entire front end was one giant piece of carbon fiber that opened like a clamshell, because apparently regular hoods were too mainstream. The interior was where things got properly weird. The front seats could swivel a full 360 degrees. Why? Nobody knows. Maybe Newson thought people really needed to make eye contact with their rear passengers while driving. Or maybe he just really liked office chairs. The trunk wasn't a trunk at all. It was a giant drawer that slid out from the rear like you were opening a filing cabinet. Ford claimed this made loading groceries easier, because nothing says practical family car like having to pull your entire trunk out into traffic to load your shopping bags. The dashboard was just one continuous piece of aluminum that wrapped around the interior. No buttons, no switches, just smooth, featureless metal. The steering wheel looked like it was stolen from a 1950s spaceship movie. And the best part? Ford was actually serious about this thing. They weren't just messing around. They genuinely thought minimalist furniture design was the future of automobiles. The O21C used recycled and sustainable materials throughout, which was revolutionary for 1999. The body panels were made from carbon fiber reinforced with recycled materials. The interior used cork and recycled aluminum. It was essentially a Whole Foods on wheels. Ford executives stood there with straight faces and told journalists this represented the future of urban transportation. Urban transportation that looked like it escaped from a geometry textbook. The car was named after the Pantone orange color it was painted in, 021. Because when you're already being pretentious enough to hire a furniture designer to build your concept car, why not name it after a color code? The O21C never made it to production, surprisingly. Turns out, people weren't ready to drive around in minimalist art installations. Number 9. BMW Z18. BMW in 1995 looked at the SUV market, looked at the roadster market, and thought, why not both? The Z18 was their answer to a question literally nobody was asking. This thing couldn't decide if it wanted to be a sports car or a truck, so it tried to be everything at once. It was a convertible, with four-wheel drive, and a V8 engine, and it could transform into a pickup truck. No, seriously, the rear section could be reconfigured to create a small truck bed. Because nothing says ultimate driving machine like hauling mulch on the weekends. The design was, well, imagine if a BMW Z3 had a really rough night with a Jeep Wrangler. It had massive off-road tires that looked completely ridiculous on what was supposedly a roadster. The ground clearance was so high you needed a ladder to get in. But it also had a sport-tuned suspension. BMW claimed it could handle both the Nürburgring and the Rubicon Trail. Sure, BMW, sure it could. The interior was just as confused as the exterior. It had racing bucket seats. But also waterproof hose-down materials like a Jeep. The dashboard looked like it was designed for a luxury sedan, but the floor had drain plugs for when you wanted to wash out the mud, or blood, or whatever you were hauling in your convertible pickup sports SUV thing. The Z18 had a 3.4-liter V8 making 230 horsepower. Not bad for 1995. But it weighed nearly 2 tons because of all the four-wheel drive hardware and the transforming pickup bed mechanism. So it wasn't exactly quick, it wasn't exactly good off-road either, despite the big tires and four-wheel drive. The engineers admitted the handling was challenging. That's German for absolutely terrifying. The convertible top was manual and took about 10 minutes to put up or take down. And when it was down, it took up most of the pickup bed space. So you could either have a convertible or a pickup, but not really both at the same time. BMW executives presented this with complete seriousness at the Tokyo Motor Show. They talked about lifestyle versatility and breaking traditional segment boundaries. What they'd really done was create the world's most expensive identity crisis. The press didn't know what to make of it. Was it a sports car for people who wanted to go camping? Was it an off-roader for people who wanted to look fabulous? Was it a pickup truck for people who hated having a roof? Nobody knew, including BMW apparently. The Z18 never saw production, which was probably for the best. The world wasn't ready for a convertible pickup sports SUV. Actually, the world still isn't ready for that. Number 8, GM Ultralite General Motors in 1992 decided to show everyone they could build an efficient car. Not just efficient, insanely, impossibly, physics-defyingly efficient. The Ultralite was supposed to get 100 miles per gallon. 100. In 1992. When most cars were getting 20 if they were lucky, how were they going to achieve this miracle? Simple. Make the entire car out of carbon fiber. All of it, every single body panel. In 1992, when carbon fiber was so expensive that Formula One teams could barely afford it, the Ultralite weighed just 1,400 pounds. That's less than a modern Mazda Miata, but it was a full 4-door sedan with seating for 4 adults. GM had basically built a car out of paper mache and hope. The drag coefficient was 0.19. For context, that's better than most modern electric vehicles. It looked like a suppository, a 4-wheeled suppository painted silver. But it sliced through the air like nothing else on the road. Under the hood, well, actually, under the rear seat, was a 1.5-liter 3-cylinder engine making 111 horsepower. That doesn't sound like much, but remember, this thing weighed less than most motorcycles. It could hit 62 miles per hour in less than 8 seconds. The interior was minimalist, and by minimalist, I mean cheap. Everything was made from the lightest possible materials. The seats were basically carbon fiber shells with thin padding. The dashboard was a single piece of molded composite. There was no sound deadening, no luxury features, no anything that might add weight. Riding in it was apparently like being inside a drum. Every bump, every pebble, every imperfection in the road was transmitted directly to your spine. The carbon fiber body had all the sound insulation properties of a paper bag. Highway speeds were supposedly challenging due to wind noise. GM claimed the Ultralite represented the future of efficient transportation. They said carbon fiber production would become cheaper. They said consumers would accept the compromises for better fuel economy. They said a lot of things. The development cost was astronomical. Each prototype cost over $1 million to build. In 1992, money. GM executives stood there and claimed they could eventually build these for $20,000 with a straight face. The Ultralite did achieve some impressive numbers in testing. It really did get close to 100 miles per gallon at steady highway speeds. Of course, that was with professional drivers, perfect conditions, and probably some very creative accounting. But still, the project was quietly shelved when GM realized that A, carbon fiber wasn't getting cheaper anytime soon, B, people actually liked having sound insulation and comfort in their cars, and C, safety regulations existed. Turns out you can't just make a car out of carbon fiber and hope for the best. Who knew? Number 7. Renault Zoom. Renault in 1992 had a solution to urban parking problems. Their solution? Make the car shorter. Not smaller. Just shorter. The Zoom could literally shrink itself. I'm not making this up. The rear wheels could slide forward, reducing the car's wheelbase from 8.5 feet to just 4.9 feet. It was like automotive origami. Press a button, and your car would basically fold in half. Well, not half. More like compress. Like an accordion. An electric accordion that you could drive. The Zoom was fully electric because of course it was. This was peak 1990s environmental consciousness. It had a top speed of 75 miles per hour and a range of about 90 miles. When it wasn't busy transforming itself anyway. The transformation process took about 15 seconds. The rear wheels would slide forward on rails while the rear bodywork telescoped into itself. Watching it happen was like seeing a transformer having an existential crisis. The doors were scissor doors. Because if you're already making a shrinking car, why not add doors that open upward? Practicality had already left the building anyway. The interior was designed for the car's compressed state, which meant when it was fully extended, the rear seats were roughly 8 miles from the front ones. Okay, not 8 miles. But passengers in the back needed binoculars to see the dashboard. Renault claimed this would revolutionize city driving. Park in tiny spaces, navigate narrow streets, confuse literally everyone who sees you. The Zoom was displayed at the Paris Motor Show to bewildered crowds. People didn't know whether to applaud or call for medical help. The French press called it audacious. The international press called it, "What the hell is wrong with Renault?" The engineering was actually impressive. The sliding mechanism used aerospace-grade materials. The electric motors for the transformation were borrowed from industrial robots. This wasn't just some design student's fever dream. Real engineers spent real time making this work. The body panels were made from recycled plastics because Renault wanted to be environmental while also being completely insane. The interior used sustainable materials like bamboo and recycled aluminum. It was eco-friendly madness. The Zoom could supposedly handle normal driving duties when extended and become a city mode when compressed. In city mode, the handling was described as unusual. That's French for absolutely terrifying. The center of gravity shifted dramatically during transformation. Renault never made production versions, shockingly. Turns out the complexity, cost, and general impracticality of a shape-shifting car were deal breakers. Also, safety regulators took one look at it and started laughing. They haven't stopped. Number 6. Opel Twin. Opel in 1992 had a revolutionary idea. What if you could change your car's entire powertrain? Not just the engine. The whole back half of the car. The Twin was literally 2 cars in one, and you could swap between them whenever you wanted. The front half was always the same, a little 2-seat cab with the driver and passenger. But the rear, you could have either an electric module for city driving or a gasoline module for longer trips. The modules could be swapped in about 30 seconds at special stations. Imagine pulling into what looked like a car wash, having robots remove half your car, and installing a completely different half. That was Opel's vision of the future. The electric module had a small battery pack and motor good for about 60 miles of range. Perfect for commuting. The gasoline module had a tiny 0.8-liter engine for highway trips. When you got to work, you'd leave the gas module at the station and pick up a fresh electric one. It was like an automotive wardrobe change. The design looked like someone had taken a smart car and performed surgery on it. The seam where the modules connected was visible, making it look permanently broken, or like those magnetic toy cars where you could mix and match different halves. The cab section was minimalist to the point of being depressing. 2 seats, a steering wheel, some buttons. That was about it. Opel figured if you were progressive enough to want a modular car, you didn't need luxuries like comfort or style. The swap stations were supposed to be built throughout cities. Opel estimated you'd need thousands of them. Each one would cost millions to build and maintain. The modules would be owned by Opel and leased to drivers. It was basically car sharing before car sharing was a thing, except infinitely more complicated. The engineering challenges were monumental. The connection between modules had to handle structural loads, electrical systems, cooling systems, and fuel systems. It was like trying to make a universal USB port for half a car. Safety was questionable. What happened if the module wasn't properly attached? What if you got rear-ended right at the connection point? What if the electronic systems failed mid-swap? Opel's answer to all these questions was basically, it'll be fine. The Twin was shown at Geneva to confused audiences. Journalists didn't know whether to praise the innovation or stage an intervention. The Swiss, being Swiss, politely applauded, while privately questioning Opel's sanity. The few people who got to drive prototypes reported it felt disconnected, which makes sense since the car was literally disconnected in the middle. The handling changed dramatically depending on which module was attached, sometimes mid-corner, which was exciting in all the wrong ways. Opel quietly buried the Twin concept when they realized the infrastructure alone would cost more than Switzerland's GDP. Number 5. Mercedes-Benz F200. Imagination Mercedes. In 1996, decided steering wheels were outdated. Their solution? Joysticks. The F200. Imagination had no mechanical connection between the driver and the wheels. Everything was drive-by-wire, controlled by joysticks that looked like they were stolen from a fighter jet. You could steer from either front seat or both at the same time if you wanted to really confuse your passenger. The joysticks controlled steering, acceleration, and braking. Push forward to go, pull back to stop, move side to side to steer. It was like playing a very expensive, very real video game. Mercedes claimed this was safer than traditional controls. Their logic? In a crash, there was no steering column to impale you. Of course, there was also no mechanical backup if the electronics failed, but Mercedes didn't like to talk about that. The F200 also replaced mirrors with cameras. In 1996, the rear view was displayed on screens in the dashboard. This was revolutionary stuff, except the screens had the resolution of a calculator watch and the cameras couldn't handle rain, snow, or direct sunlight, or darkness. So basically, they worked perfectly in an indoor showroom. The windows were electrochromatic and could tint themselves automatically. The doors opened upward and forward like swan wings. The headlights used xenon gas. The whole car screamed future in the most 1990s way possible. Inside, it looked like the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. Screens everywhere. Buttons for everything. Voice control that understood about 3 commands on a good day. You could theoretically control the entire car without moving your hands from the armrests. The V12 engine made almost 400 horsepower, but the car was so loaded with technology it weighed over 2 tons. The computers alone supposedly weighed 300 pounds. This was 1996, remember? A laptop weighed 8 pounds back then. The active suspension could lean the car into corners like a motorcycle, or it could keep it perfectly level. Or it could bounce up and down like a lowrider, though Mercedes never officially admitted that feature. Engineers who worked on it said the joystick control took about 3 hours to master. 3 hours to learn how to drive a car you already knew how to drive. The learning curve was described as vertical. Mercedes let journalists drive it briefly. Very briefly. Most couldn't figure out how to move it in a straight line. One famously drove it straight into a hedge, though Mercedes claimed that was user error, and definitely not, because controlling a car with a joystick is insane. The F200's technology did eventually make it to production cars, just 20 years later, and with a steering wheel. Because it turns out people like steering wheels. Weird. Number 4. Renault Raccoon. Renault, in 1992, wasn't satisfied with just making a shrinking car. They also wanted to make an amphibious one. The Raccoon was designed to go literally anywhere. Land, water, probably space. If Renault's engineers had another week and some more wine. This thing had 6 wheels. Well, sometimes. The middle pair could be raised or lowered depending on terrain. It was like a mechanical centipede that couldn't decide how many legs it needed. The door was a single glass canopy that opened upward like a helicopter. Getting in required gymnastic skills. Getting out in a parking lot required prayer that nobody was watching. The seats were arranged in a triangle, 1 in front, 2 in back. Because Renault apparently thought traditional seating arrangements were too mainstream. The driver sat in the middle, like a McLaren F1, if the McLaren F1 was designed by someone having a fever dream. For water crossing, the Raccoon had a sealed hull and a water mode that would raise the wheels and deploy a propeller. Yes, a propeller. Renault claimed it could cross rivers. In reality, it could barely handle a puddle without taking on water. The cameras, instead of mirrors, weren't just for show, they were waterproof. The entire electrical system was supposedly waterproof too. Supposedly, doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, the all-wheel drive system was derived from Renault's Paris-Dakar rally experience. Each wheel had its own electric motor. The main engine was a tiny turbocharged unit that acted as a generator. It was a hybrid before hybrids were cool, or understood, or reliable. The suspension travel was measured in feet, not inches. This thing could climb over obstacles that would stop a mountain goat. It could also lean into corners, kneel to make entry easier, and dance. Okay, it couldn't dance. But Renault's engineers probably tried. The interior was waterproof and could be hosed out. The seats were made from wetsuit material. The controls were all sealed touchpads because physical buttons might let water in. Using any of them with wet fingers was impossible, but hey, details. Renault tested the Raccoon in the Alps, the Sahara, and the Mediterranean. It broke down in all three locations, but in different and creative ways. In the Alps, the canopy froze shut. In the Sahara, the electronics overheated. In the Mediterranean, it sank. Well, almost sank. The journalists on board were told it was testing the limits of amphibious capability. What it was actually doing was trying to become a submarine. The Raccoon was shown at the Paris show, where Renault executives explained it represented absolute freedom of movement. The freedom to get stuck in places no tow truck could reach, maybe. The audience was genuinely impressed by the ambition. And genuinely concerned about Renault's mental health. The engineering team spent 3 years and millions of francs developing the Raccoon. When asked why, the lead engineer simply said, "Because we could." Which is probably the most honest answer any concept car has ever received. Number 3. Mercedes-Benz F300 Life Jet. Mercedes-Benz in 1997 looked at motorcycles and thought, "Those look fun." Then they looked at cars and thought, "Those are safe." Then some absolute madman said, "Why don't we combine them?" The F300 Life Jet was born, and physics wept. This was a 3-wheeled vehicle that could lean into corners. 30 degrees of lean. Like a motorcycle. Except it had a roof. And seatbelts. And the complexity of the space shuttle. The active tilt control system used hydraulic actuators to lean the entire cabin and front wheels, while the rear wheels stayed upright. It could pull 1.3 Gs in corners. That's supercar territory. In a 3-wheeler, that tilted. Mercedes claimed this combined the excitement of a motorcycle with the safety of a car. What it actually combined was the complexity of a helicopter with the practicality of a unicycle. The two occupants sat in tandem, like a fighter jet. The passenger sat behind and above the driver, presumably so they could scream directly into the driver's ear during the terrifying cornering maneuvers. Entry was through a canopy that lifted forward. Getting in required the flexibility of a gymnast. Getting out after experiencing the tilting at speed required new underwear. The F300 was actually based on Mercedes' racing technology. The active tilt control system was derived from their Formula One active suspension research. Because nothing says practical transportation like F1 technology in a 3-wheeler. The tiny 1.6-liter engine made 130 horsepower. Doesn't sound like much, but the whole thing weighed just 800 kilograms. It could hit 62 miles per hour in 7.7 seconds, while tilting. The tilting sensation was described by test drivers as unique. That's German for pants-wettingly terrifying. At speed, the computer would predict corners and start leaning before the driver even turned the wheel. Passengers who weren't expecting it would grab anything they could find, usually the driver. The system had multiple modes. Comfort mode limited the tilt to 10 degrees. Sport mode gave you the full 30 degrees. And there was apparently an unofficial, insane mode that engineers use for testing, which would tilt so aggressively that occupants needed neck braces. In wet conditions, the computer would reduce the tilt angle. It had to. Early testing showed that full tilt in the rain resulted in what engineers diplomatically called dynamic instability. Everyone else called it crashing. Mercedes let a few journalists experience the F300. Most emerged pale and speechless. One famously said it was like being in a washing machine that could corner. Another just sat on the ground for 10 minutes after his ride, contemplating existence. The technology was impressive, though. The system could react in milliseconds, adjusting the tilt based on speed, steering input, road conditions, and probably the driver's heart rate. It had more sensors than a space probe and more computing power than most 1990s desktop computers. Mercedes spent a fortune developing the F300. The prototype cost millions of Deutsche Marks. Each hydraulic actuator was worth more than most people's cars. The control software alone took 2 years to develop, and they were serious about production. Mercedes actually thought people would buy this. They did market research. They showed it to focus groups. The focus groups needed therapy afterwards, but Mercedes interpreted their stunned silence as enthusiasm. The F300 never made it to production, obviously. The cost, complexity, and general terror it induced were slight barriers to mass production. Plus, regulators couldn't figure out if it was a car or a motorcycle, so they just said no to everything. Number 2. Honda Fuya-Jo. Honda, in 1999, looked at cars and thought, these are boring. Then they looked at nightclubs and thought, those are fun. Then someone who had clearly been to too many raves said, let's combine them. The Fuya-Jo was literally a nightclub on wheels. I'm not exaggerating. The design brief was create a party vehicle, not a party bus. A party vehicle for people who wanted to dance, while parked, hopefully. The Fuya-Jo was designed for standing, not sitting. The floor was at the perfect height for standing adults. The ceiling was tall enough for people to stand upright. It was basically a mobile dance floor with wheels. The steering wheel was mounted on a stand like a DJ's turntable. The driver stood while driving. The dashboard looked like a mixing board. Honda's designers had clearly spent a lot of time in Tokyo nightclubs and decided that's what cars were missing. The sides were mostly glass with minimal pillars, so everyone could see you having a party in your car, or having a breakdown. The glass was tinted blue because of course it was. This was peak 1990s Japanese futurism. There were no traditional seats. Instead, there were padded platforms at different heights where people could sit, stand, lean, or collapse after too much partying. The interior lighting system was straight from a nightclub. Colored LEDs, strobes, and what Honda called mood illumination. You could literally have a light show in your car. The sound system was engineered specifically for dance music. The speakers were positioned to create a three-dimensional sound space. Honda claimed it could reproduce the nightclub experience, while parked. They were very insistent about the while parked part. The instrument panel was inspired by DJ equipment. Instead of normal gauges, you had displays that looked like VU meters. The speedometer was designed to look like a beats per minute counter. Everything about this car screamed, I make poor life choices. Honda claimed the Fuya-Jo represented the future of social mobility. Not transportation, social mobility. They imagined groups of them parked together, creating impromptu party zones. It was car culture meets club culture meets what were they thinking culture. The name Fuya-Jo literally meant sleepless city. Because Honda expected owners to party all night in their cars. The marketing material actually showed people dancing in and around the vehicle, at gas stations, in parking lots, on city streets. Honda's legal department must have been horrified. The prototype shown at Tokyo had a small electric motor, because even Honda knew a party car shouldn't have emissions. It had a range of about 40 miles and a top speed of who cares, you're supposed to be parked. The few people who experienced the Fuya-Jo said it was overwhelming. The combination of standing while driving, the nightclub aesthetics, and the general absurdity of it all created a unique experience. Unique being a polite way of saying completely insane. Honda was actually proud of this. They presented it with complete seriousness. Engineers explained the acoustic engineering that went into the sound system. Designers discussed the ergonomics of standing while driving. Everyone pretended this was normal. The auto industry's reaction was confusion. Was it a car? Was it a mobile disco? Was it a cry for help? Nobody knew. Honda just smiled and turned up the music. The Fuya-Jo appeared at one more show before disappearing forever. Honda never mentioned it again. It's like they woke up from the 1990s, saw what they'd created, and decided to pretend it never happened. There are rumors that the prototype still exists, hidden in Honda's secret warehouse. At night, they say you can still hear the bass thumping. Number 1, Renault Espace F1, and here we are. Number 1, the most insane concept car of the 1990s, maybe the most insane concept car ever. The Renault Espace F1. Take a moment to appreciate what Renault did here. They took a minivan, a family minivan, and they put a Formula 1 engine in it, not a racing engine, an actual Formula 1 engine, a 3.5-liter V10 from their Williams Formula 1 car, 800 horsepower, in a minivan. The Espace F1 could hit 62 miles per hour in 2.8 seconds. 2.8. That was faster than any production car in 1994. Faster than a Ferrari, faster than a Lamborghini, in a vehicle designed to take kids to soccer practice. The top speed was over 190 miles per hour, in a minivan, with 4 seats and cup holders. The absurdity of this cannot be overstated. This was a practical family vehicle that could out-accelerate a Formula 1 car to 60. It looked almost like a regular Espace. That was the brilliant part. Renault only made subtle body modifications. Wider wheels, some air intakes, a small rear wing. To the casual observer, it was just a minivan that could destroy supercars. The engine was mounted behind the front seats where the middle row would normally be. It stuck up into the cabin, covered by a carbon fiber engine. Cover. Passengers could literally reach out and touch an F1 engine while driving to the grocery store. The transmission was a 6-speed sequential gearbox from Formula 1. The suspension was from Formula 1. The brakes were from Formula 1. The only thing that wasn't from Formula 1 was the basic shell of the minivan. And the cup holders. The sound was indescribable. Formula 1 engines scream at up to 15,000 RPM. This one was limited to 9,000 RPM for reliability. Reliability in a very loose sense. It still sounded like the world was ending. Inside a minivan. Starting it required a full Formula 1 warm-up procedure. Oil temperature had to be raised, coolant had to be circulated, various systems had to be primed. It took about 20 minutes to properly start. Your grocery run required the same preparation as a Grand Prix. Renault let a few very brave journalists drive it. Most couldn't handle it. The acceleration was so violent that one journalist forgot to breathe and nearly passed out. Another said it was like being shot from a cannon while sitting in your living room. The contrast between the minivan interior and the F1 performance broke people's brains. You're sitting in what looks like a family car. There's comfortable seating, storage compartments. Then you press the accelerator and suddenly you're traveling through time. The carbon ceramic brakes could stop it from 100 miles per hour in under 3 seconds. The G-forces would throw everything in the cabin forward, including your internal organs. Renault claimed it was fully functional. You could theoretically use it for school runs. If your school was at a racetrack, and your kids were trained fighter pilots, and you had a death wish, the fuel consumption was measured in gallons per mile, not miles per gallon. The engine needed rebuilding every 3,000 miles. The clutch lasted about 5 starts. The cooling system needed constant attention. It was the most impractical practical car ever built. But here's the thing. Renault built it just because they could. There was no plan to produce it, no marketing angle, no technological showcase. They just wanted to see what would happen if you put an F1 engine in a minivan. What happened was, they created a legend. The Espace F1 became the ultimate what-if car. What if we ignored all logic? What if we had unlimited budget? What if engineers were allowed to do whatever they wanted? The few people who saw it run said it was life-changing. Not because it was fast, lots of cars are fast, but because it was wrong. Beautifully, gloriously, magnificently wrong. It was a minivan that could humble Ferraris, a family car that required a pit crew, a practical vehicle that was completely impractical. It was, without question, the most unusual concept car of the 1990s. Nothing else came close. Nothing else was this audacious, this absurd, this brilliant. The Espace F1 still exists, sitting in Renault's museum. They occasionally start it up for special events. The sound still causes people to stop and stare in confusion. A minivan shouldn't sound like that. But this one does. Because in 1994, Renault decided that rules were suggestions and sanity was overrated. And there you have it. That's 10 of the most unusual concept cars from the 1990s, a decade when automotive designers had unlimited imagination and apparently unlimited cocaine budgets. Which of these rolling fever dreams do you think should have made it to production? And more importantly, which one would you actually drive? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, tell us about any insane concept cars we missed. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this trip through automotive madness. Hit the notification bell too, because we've got more 1990s insanity coming your way. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.